Hey friend, welcome back to the Created Worthy podcast. I am your host and fellow worthy warrior, Danielle Damrell. On this show, we are creating space for genuine connection by unifying women of all ages, backgrounds, and experiences. So grab your favorite drink and get ready to listen as we take a deep dive into our stories, making sure to honor and protect them in the process. We will also uncover the threads of creative processing that have already played a part in each of our lives. When we know how to utilize this as a skill, we can continue growing into the joy-filled, triumphant women we are created to be. You are created worthy. Hello, welcome back to the Created Worthy podcast. Today, we are joined by Savannah Higgins for part 2 of the 2-part processing series that we're doing. And she reached out earlier this week and had said that she'd gone through some pretty significant grief in her life and that she had an experience that she did some creative processing about. And she actually wrote a beautiful story that she sent over, and I read it and I was like, wow, this is really powerful. And then I offered I asked her, and then I asked her if she would like to join me to come and process grief and to talk about her process through grief. So on last week's episode, we talked about processing change. And on this week's episode, we are processing grief. And we're talking about how we overcome, but more importantly, walk through. Yes, we want to get to the other side, and we want those things that we go through that unfortunately happen to everyone. Grief happens to everyone. We want to get to the other side of that and to be able to live from a place of reflection and where it's not so painful. But we have to walk through a process. So, Savannah, I would love for you to share your heart. What's going on? Give us a little bit of an update. You know the drill.
Yeah. So I know you already mentioned that we talked about change and we kind of processed through how to handle change when it comes inevitably, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, like grief is just a form of change. It's just one of those more powerful feelings, like one of those more powerful emotions that can be more of a driving force for how you interact and how you react and how you choose to accept that change into your life, right? So that the grief is just something that changes, where everyone will and has experienced grief. And I think what happened to me recently, I hate saying
for you.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was just about to say. It's like I hate saying that. Like I hate saying that what happened to me because and I think it's just more of like a conscious thing. I hate putting myself at the center of any of my own stories. But like, man, that sucks too because I am kind of the center of every one of my stories.
Right. Like you are the one who's living in your experience, right?
It's my life.
It is your life and you're the only one who has control over your life and the things that do happen to us, right? Like we can't deny the fact that situations happen that are outside of our control and that by English language happen to us. How else do you I'm sure there are more eloquent ways to say that, but the point is the same. We are in situations every day that we can look at as happening to us in a negative way or happening to us in a positive way. And another way, I guess, of saying that would be happening for us, right?
Yeah.
But it's not like you chose the thing that happened.
Right. And so that kind of also leads into like my own experience that recently happened with grief, and that sometimes maybe our experiences aren't even happening for us in every situation, that our experience is happening for other people. And that
ooh,
you're just kind of like that supporting piece in that section of the story or that chapter of your story or, that.
From somebody else's perspective, that is exactly.
So recently, and this past month, that's why we're kind of talking about these two things. For me, like I've experienced a lot of change in a lot of different ways and also grief in a lot of different ways. And I think that's why we thought that this was an important topic to bring up, especially right now with like the things that are going on in our world and the things that are going on in our government and our society and like just a lot of the unknown that we can't really control so much on an individual level. But, you know, there are things and steps and ways that we can live our life on an individual level that do support our values and our missions and our goals and like healthy habits and good choices and broadened perspectives, even.
Right.
And greater understanding of the
Yeah.
thing and the people around us. So, um, grief, I think you can experience grief in a lot of different ways. You can grieve over the loss of a loved one. You can grieve over the loss of a career path. You can grieve over even, you know, changing your majors in college 3 or 4 times. You can grieve over the fact that your children are growing up right in front of you.
Yeah.
You can
Your
grieve,
youth when you start changing
yeah,
physically.
and your
Yeah.
health. So there's a lot. And like when talking about grief in this way, it's like shedding stuff. And you're shedding as you change and as you
Hmm.
accept that change. And so, what are you allowing to shed from the old you and the old versions of you? Because there's going to be several versions of you throughout your lifespan.
Yeah.
And so, I recently, this past month, watched someone really close to me take her last breath, and I was the only one with her. And it was really tough.
Mm.
But also like super rewarding in like a super bittersweet, like, man, like it's crazy how we don't have a whole lot of control, but like we do.
Yeah. Yeah. In some ways we do, in some ways we don't. And that goes back to that like thing idea that we talked about last episode where in moments of grief especially, it is important to identify what we can control and what we cannot control. And death is one of those big things that we cannot control, right?
But in that moment, I got to control the presence that I brought
Hmm.
at that time, and I got to control my interpretation of that experience
Yeah.
because while I have been around someone in their last moments, I've never actually experienced someone taking their last breath.
Mm.
Um, and so there were some familiar telltale signs that like I did recognize just from like physical signs that like you know when someone is ready to depart this earth physically that happen. So I did recognize those things and I knew that these moments that I was going to share with her were going to be her last moments and were going to be very quickly at that point. Like I knew that I didn't have a whole lot of time left because part of I'm like trembling just telling this story.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing it though, because I think a lot of people relate. I have unfortunately been in the room for a few people's last breaths and the signs and symptoms are very similar. They're all I mean, we're humans, right? So how we
Right.
die a lot of times is similar. And depending on the disease, of course, things look differently, but the signs of death are consistent. And I think that's part of the grief process of like walking through what actually happened. So I just want to say thank you for being vulnerable and for sharing about this because it is something that's hard to talk about. And I don't want that's not going to be lost on me or the listeners.
It was funny that I was reminded by someone who knew a past version of me that stayed with me this past weekend for the services. She said, Savannah, I forgot, but you always do like bring some sort of humor in awkward or tough or hard situations because I think when I stood up at the service to speak, I was following some other guy that had just stood up and he had told a story about how generous she was. And I stood up and I said, yeah, she was real generous. She loaned me her husband and one of her sons once to help me put together a grill because I had no idea what I was doing. And she was very generous. So that was like what I kind of led my heartfelt service, or like my heartfelt like speech even at the service. So I kind of like I hate
Oh,
feeling vulnerable, but like making people feel uncomfortable in that vulnerability
right.
if that's not something that they like are used to tapping into, you know.
Right.
So I
It is like when you are kind of you like you know how to be vulnerable. We talk vulnerably quite often, but I do think that it's like not everybody knows how to do that just casually.
oh yeah, like no, I know how to
And
make things feel
sometimes I'm
awkward.
like, is this a gift? Is this a gift? So I'm so glad that you bring humor into it. We need people to do that. We need people to be vulnerable. So,
Yeah, that's just kind of, you know, my way of like breaking the tension and making myself, I guess, feel more comfortable talking about it. So I don't know. But back to the story. I think that I think that the most significant thing for me, and you know, like Danielle said, I do plan on publishing this as some sort of a blog in a space, and she'll let you know all about that at the end too. Um, but that she was actually the point person and the person that I felt was closest to another friend of mine that, you know, I'm actually not natively from where I live right now. And but I've lived here for the past 13 years, you know? And so when you move somewhere and you don't really have any family, you make family out of the friends that you build and the community that you build around you. And Susie was part of that community. Her family was part of that community. And another family that was also close to me. And we all actually worked together in the same place, which that can probably be part of my life story episode at some point when I actually do sit down and not talk too much and get off track and actually focus on the full story. But
it's
uh,
okay. We talked about that in your very first episode. This you're not at a place. You're a perfect example of someone who's just not at a place where you're ready to share your full story and you don't feel called to that right now. And that's okay. But you do have messages on your heart that you do feel called to share. So I love that there's this container in which we can share those. So,
yeah, I mean, it's a safe space all around. So that's what this podcast is here for, right?
yeah.
But we all worked in the same place together, and so it would easily allowed us the time together to form a really good bond with these people. And unfortunately, quite a few years ago now at this point, a really close friend in that circle and all of these people which we similarly shared were that we were all transplants too. None of these families that I became friends with over a decade ago had family here either, or had like one or two family members that came with them, but like just their intimate immediate family, and
Mm-hmm.
that was it. Like, so we all kind of became each other's family. And unfortunately, one of our close friends passed away, like I said, quite a few years ago. And I got a tattoo in memory of her.
Mm.
She's the big mama owl here because she loved my kids a lot. And Susie was by her side in those last few moments. And so it was kind of like a really gratifying come of circle kind of thing, like not something that any of us were prepared for because nobody, how can you ever prepare for a phone call out of the blue, especially of somebody from a circumstance, which I talk more about in my blog, um, that I was reconnecting with after an absence of time that I could have ever expected getting a call about someone like that. And so, like, you know, the unexpected, the changes that come into your life. I don't know if you guys are kind of seeing that.
Mm-hmm. The
that trend
theme.
there. The theme of life here is that, the roller coaster of life that we're on is that sometimes some things connect on those tracks at just the right time or the wrong time. And, it's just how you interpret it. And it was just a really beautiful moment where it was peaceful, and she was the type of person that was always thinking of everyone else, that she would put everyone else's needs above her own. And the place that we shared, the same place where we worked at, was a place of a lot of different types of stories and outcomes, but also a lot of connection and a lot of healing. We did build a lot of relationships with our students. We were mentors to students in like a boarding school type of setting. And so the work that she did was meaningful because she was always giving of herself to other people. And I think for me, like, that interpretation came down to how in the world would I have been the one that the universe chose to pick out of all of the people in her life that have been along this journey, which also part of that journey was cancer. She got diagnosed a few years ago with, and as she was getting diagnosed with a very life-altering and changing thing, I was also going through a very life-altering and changing transformation of my own, and becoming a single mother, and just kind of distancing myself from a lot of people from my past, just because of the focus that I started putting on me, my family, and my kids, like just trying to find happiness and more fulfillment in life. And so, it's one of those things where, like, out of everyone in the universe, how the heck, like, was I the one that got that phone call and was able to leave work at the drop of a dime and be by her side and relieve her son of, maybe something that a lot of people dread, witnessing.
Yeah.
Could you be in the room with your mother or your daughter or your sister or your brother or your dad, whoever it is that's closest to you,
Right.
a child?
Nobody wants to go into those moments.
Like, you don't know what to expect, because there are several ways of leaving this earth. You always hope for the most peaceful and tranquil and, things like that. But, like, it's just something that you dread witnessing and grieving about over somebody that you love.
Right.
Exactly. So I think that, like, I was there in that place for a reason. Mm-hmm. It gave her son a moment.
Since you were present when she took her last breath, do you feel like that experience has unlocked something in you? Obviously now you've started into a grief cycle that you were now, even though it had been several years since you had seen her, now you were right there with her when she passed, right? So you are grieving to a different depth than if you had just heard about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
I mean, it's like really just hearing about something and like expecting it, but not expecting it in so many different ways.
Right.
As far as grieving goes, circling back to in the very beginning when we talked about there's so many different forms and ways and things that you can grieve over, and circumstances and experiences that you have in your life. It's a type of shedding, but also what are you keeping from it as you shed, the hard things about it. Like, what is going to serve you as you move into the future without whatever it is in the past. And so for me, the whole thing was kind of like this bittersweet reconnection with some past students and like now friends of mine, like really close friends, and we all joke and talk about how like, man, therapy has really helped us in so many ways because it's given us the creative processing tools, like the
Mm-hmm.
toolkit that we needed for life to be able to process hard emotions.
Right.
And while being there was like, I bawled my eyes out in the parking lot and like was calling frantically a couple of girls that I knew needed to desperately hear from me. And that might have been part of the purpose of me being there too, is that if they had heard that message on a Facebook post, their earth, like they could have been shattered, you know, like it's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things where you have to be delicate and break the news to people who she meant a lot to a lot of people because she
Mm-hmm.
could feel their pain at her very core because she walked the path of not knowing who her biological family was up
Mm-hmm.
until very recently. So it's just, you know, I don't know. It
Connection.
it teaches you to have the grace and gratitude of every little moment and then turning it into something that's going to benefit you. Like, yes, she will be missed. Yes, I'm heartbroken. Yes, it was really tough, but it also brought some really great new connections or rekindled some connections that I had lost. I'm in contact with several people now that like it's brought some more connection back to, and you know, I'm just grateful for that. So I know that you wanted to speak a little bit on being grateful even in the grief. So go
Yes,
ahead.
for sure. So everyone has heard of the cycles of grief, right? Like they're psychologically, when we face grief of any kind, no matter the circumstance, typically we go through shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, and acceptance, which is a little bit different than what I've traditionally heard, but all of those line up with everything. If you Google stages of grief, those are what they are. And so recently I learned about grief, walking through the stages of grief as a tunnel. And I thought it was a really good example of how I'm going to show the people on who are on YouTube, but there's this tunnel. So the first part is shock and denial, and that's where you plummet straight down, right? And then you're kind of like, okay, working through these loops throughout the tunnel, and it's spiraling down, and then it goes back up, and ideally we get to like meaningful life. That's what we want to return to. Yeah, exactly. The roller coaster. It looks actually, does this not look a lot like a roller coaster?
Yes.
It does. It looks a lot like a roller coaster.
I
And
might be onto something.
you might, yeah, I think that you definitely are onto something. So the idea though is like once you get to the like anger, it hurts in your soul, you feel maybe a lot of depression or you start detaching from your life, you feel overwhelmed, you lack energy, all of these different things. That's when we have those decisions to go, okay, what do we do next? And there are two things that I recommend and I think we try to do and we need reminded of all throughout life because a lot of times we know these things but we need to hear them at different moments. But the first thing we can do is surrender, right? We can surrender control of the things we cannot control. And we can say, this really freaking sucked. And we can admit that. And we can say, like, this, whatever I'm facing or losing this person was terrible. I feel broken. And just admitting really to yourself and accepting yourself where you're at. And then surrendering that and saying, but you have control, whoever you is, whoever your higher power is, right? Giving that to God. And then you do that by practicing gratitude. And that's how you start to get back up, right? Get back up to that meaningful life. Ride the roller coaster to where it can drop you back off at your baseline. And gratitude is one of the most powerful ways. If you search, and I'll put one in the show notes, but any research on gratitude, you will see that it is a science. Like it is scientifically researched and proven that it will change your mental state. And although it doesn't feel good to be grateful for the hard things that we're walking through, specifically the thing that we are surrendering, specifically the thing that we're grieving, practicing gratitude in the face of that is exactly how we're going to get back to that meaningful life. And so
telling yourself, this is tough, but I know I will get through it. And when I do, that I have faith in the purpose, like that there was a purpose for having to walk that path.
And sometimes you start to see those things just by doing those, practicing gratitude for those simple things. One activity or exercise I want to leave you guys with, and really this is a creative processing exercise, is I think it would be great if you just map out, get a piece of paper, pause this, it's YouTube or on your podcast, and write down these different categories, because these categories are just things that you'll be able to be grateful for, find things to be grateful for. And we start with the basics, our senses. What do you see? What are things that you see that you can be grateful for? What do you hear? Stories, sermons, music, podcasts. What are things that you can be grateful for? Smell. What are things that you can smell that you are grateful for? Feel or touch. Taste. What spiritually are you grateful for? What emotionally are you grateful for? Or intellectually? Physically? Movement? Dance? Being able to walk? Simple things. Creatively, what are you grateful for? Financially, what are you grateful for? Culturally, this one was hard for me, but we can find things to be grateful for when things are categorized out like this. So culturally, what are you grateful for? Recreationally, that's where I would put fun. What things do you do for fun that you can be grateful for? Technologically, what advancements do we have that we can be grateful for? Yes, this right now, right here. This is, we can practice gratitude for this. And developmentally, maturity. Developmentally, what can you be grateful for? What maturity have you gained? How is your brain, how can you celebrate how your brain is unique and beautiful, and the things that you have been able to create and feel and touch? Overarching. If we break things down into categories like this, and I want to give credit where credit is due, I did get these categories from a class on mental health that I am walking through myself at my church. So shout out to Roger. He is a therapist who gave these recommendations, and actually even the stages of grief is what we've been talking about as well. But I just want to pass on this information because it was really helpful for me as somebody who thinks too deeply. My brain works really fast, and even just trying to identify something to be grateful for was hard until I had a roadmap laid out. Hey, just think about something that you see. What do you see in front of you? You can be grateful for that. What do you hear? All of the basic things in the categories that we just went through. So hopefully that will be helpful for somebody. And I think that you will find that if you are at that place where you're just struggling through one of those ups and downs in life, or you're going through the grief cycle like Savannah is, and so many others right now who have been impacted by Susie, that you would just try to practice gratitude in simple ways. It doesn't have to be that you are suddenly overwhelmingly grateful for the thing that is the hardest that you're walking through right now. It doesn't usually work like that. We take small steps, and gratitude is one of those things that it's really easy to titrate. So that's my encouragement to you. And Savannah, take it away.
Yeah, I know I mentioned on our last episode. So if you didn't watch or listen, I guess, the last processing episode, which she can probably also like refer back to which episode number that's going to be in the show notes here as well. So if you didn't watch that one, I did also at the very end talk about how I practice gratitude, and specifically what I do sometimes in my processes of journaling and things like that, and how I incorporate gratitude into that. So go back and listen to that one if you want those recommendations too for gratitude.
Yes, I'm so glad you remembered that, and I will definitely link that in the show notes. I wrote it down. So if you are watching and you're like, she keeps looking away, trust me, I know how to run my show. Being on YouTube, was that I was like, what do I do about all the notes that I take? Oh, well.
That's okay. Just take them.
It's part of it. It's part of it. This is how I have conversations even during the life story coaching that I do, is I'm constantly like, da, 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 da.
Whatever. This is how you have real life conversations too, because you're like, can you repeat that? And
You're right. You're right. The note. Whoa, I bounced my camera. The note, I got excited. The notepad on my phone is just full of conversation, like from people's stories, from different advice. Just, yeah, you're right. I always tell people, I'm like, if anything ever happens to me, is this bad to add onto a grief process? Whatever, here we are. If anything ever happens to me, just go to my notepad and my phone and you will know the depths of my brain and every conversation that I've had. Well, Savannah, thank you again so much for joining me for these last 2 episodes. It really is always such an honor, and I'm so grateful for our friendship, and I'm also just grateful for the knowledge that you share with us and that we mutually get to have conversations about in our friendship, but then we get to come on here and we get to hopefully encourage other people. If this episode or either of these episodes have encouraged you in any way, please make sure to reach out to us on Instagram or leave a review. Go down to the bottom, rate 5 stars, and leave a review and tell us about your favorite episode. So if you would like to read more of Savannah's story and the details, you can read the full blog by signing up for Savvy Stories at the link in the show notes. And Savannah, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story.
Thank you. I always love having conversations like this and just kind of, it's our girl time, but also our time to share insights and, hopefully let other people know that it's okay to talk about hard stuff and
we talk about hard things, and and grief is one of those hard things. And I love when we are able to process through situations like this when somebody's actually truly facing it and has just like, that takes a certain amount of courage and also level of vulnerability. But I also realize that you've taken the time to process it, right? And there is a way that you felt protected in sharing this that I think just proves that this is the time somebody else needs to probably hear some of these things too. And
Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any doubt that, is that a double negative?
I don't have any doubt.
I don't have any doubt.
Aren't
Anyway, I have no doubt.
Here?
Yeah, I know. Shh. I have no doubt that this will impact other people. And
I heart you too.
I heart you. Okay, enough of the mushy gushy stuff. I know I do that a lot on here, but I can't help it. It's who I am, and this is my podcast.
Yeah, we are super grateful for all of you guys for listening to us rant and talk and give out our viewpoints. And
these are spontaneous. Yeah, we don't have scripts anymore. I've gotten to the point now where we can sit down and we can have a focused, intentional conversation about something. We take some bunny trails sometimes, but this is created where this is Danielle Damrell.
This is the way that we creative process.
And this is the way that we creatively process sometimes too. And I think that it is great because who doesn't need to process grief?
Right. So if you don't have yourself a Danielle or hopefully one of me to help process those things, then please come join our communities because we want you here.
Exactly. Jump in. We've both got circles and we love pouring into the people in them. So thank you guys for listening and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Created Worthy podcast. If anything in today's show resonated with you, can you do me a huge favor and go leave a 5-star review? This helps more listeners find the show, and it also expands the impact, messages, and stories that are shared here. All the links and guest information are in the show notes. If you're on social media, I want to personally invite you to continue the conversations about these important topics that we're talking about. You can find Created Worthy on both Instagram and Facebook by just typing in Created Worthy Podcast. Can't wait to talk to you soon, friend. And don't forget, you are created worthy.